Building the Smoothy with Team Sail Wars racer John Charlie Air. Footy fever sweeps the country. Let's build this incredible boat.
Hey, good morning everybody. This is John. I'm the current Commodore of the Space Coast Model Sailing Club. Today we're going to talk a little bit about a footy, a very specific footy. But first I want to tell you a little bit about our club and why we're potentially looking to go down this path. On Thursdays we currently race the DF65 and the DF95. Very popular because being a one design that people can buy relatively inexpensively and 3 to 4 hours beyond the water racing. And then working their skills, but at least being a one design they have a chance to compete. Saturdays we still race Solings and the US 1 meters. Solings have been around forever. I think it's one of the best first time boats. Most of our members have never built a Soling. There's so many out there, they usually buy them used, clean them up, throw some fresh paint on them, get some new sails, and they get out there and race. But very few have actually been built by our current members. Our US 1 meter class is our smallest class. Being experimental, today we simply don't have as many builders as we used to, and I believe that's probably the trend around the entire country. What we have done is we've had some people be a little more creative. Me personally, I took a 95 and I converted it into a Dragonstein, which is an alright lightweight boat. Some of our other members have taken the Focus 2 or the Focus 3, changed up the sails to turn it into a 1 meter, and we have a few people competing that way. But that is our smallest group, and again, I think that really is because we don't have as many builders as we used to. From a club perspective, back in the day, I know we used to race RG65s. Once the DF65s came out, again, we kind of ran into that situation where the DF65 was simply so much easier, and being a one design, and I believe most of the clubs around the country kind of saw that explosion too, because you didn't have to be a builder, you didn't have to spend a lot of money, and then at the end of the day, being a one design, you felt as soon as you dropped your boat in the water, you had a chance to be competitive, and you weren't going against somebody who invested thousands of dollars in research into some custom vessel. So we no longer race the RG65, it's just those 4 classes. As a Commodore, we've done a lot of things, and I'll be honest, I've scoured the AMA website, looking at all the classes, figuring, how can I grow our club? How can I make it better? How can I introduce a boat? The footy has always intrigued me because it comes across as small, inexpensive, and supposedly easy to build. I found there's plans for free, there's tips for free, there's blogs that are out there, but at the end of the day, I never jumped into that class because I wasn't confident that our members, whether it be from a building skill perspective or maybe even just some of their age, would go down that path. So it was a couple weeks ago that I came across a footy Smoothy on Thingiverse. I do have 3D printers. I really enjoy 3D printing stuff. So when I came across this file by Nev G, and again, it is titled the Footy Smoothy. Bart will add a link for you to kind of see where that is. Not only was I impressed that this is potentially a boat that could be 3D printed, which is something I enjoy, but as soon as I began to look at the extensive work and time he put into his CAD drawings and his design, it really felt like a no-brainer. Where some of the other footies out there had looked like pencil drawings on paper and you downloaded them, every detail was worked out, and he had overcome what most people, or some people have said, were some of the limitations of the footies. Some people have said that the footies traditionally have a tendency to nosedive and submerge, and as soon as I saw some of what he incorporated into the buoyancy in the front of the hull, and then the foil on the rudder, it kind of felt like it felt like a no-brainer. So I decided to take on the task to build a prototype, introduce it to the club, and see what kind of response we could get. The difference that I chose to take, though, in the direction that we're going to go with the Space Coast Model Sailing Club is we're going to introduce this Footy, but we're going to classify it as a one design. There's a multitude of different reasons, but the advantage for us doing a one design is kind of piggybacks on the popularity of the DF65, the DF95, and the Soling. If somebody had one, at least to the point where they dropped it in the water, they felt that they were going to have a fair advantage because the boats were all going to be the same. And then it really came down to the sailor, or some days just a whole lot of luck, right? We all know that too. So we're, like I said, so again, we're going to incorporate this boat as a one design. For us, classifying that as a one design really has some kind of minimum expectations. The idea will be to take what he designed, and we're going to print that boat. But the big difference is, and if this is in your camera view, we're going to use Icarus for our sails. Biggest reason there is we have it in a bunch of different colors. It's worked out really well. A lot of the guys have used Icarus for the Solings, 95s and 65s. When you have 15 boats on the water, it makes it a lot easier to pick out your vessel. I do believe the boat would probably perform better with boats made out of Mylar. Again, but then because we're kind of making up our own sort of rules as we go, we're going to go with Icarus for the sails. I've chosen a battery, the preferred battery, which is just going to establish the minimum weight for a battery. I'm kind of using I'm going to mimic some of the rules from the 65 and 95 class, right? So we know we're going to have a minimum weight battery. We are going to determine the type of sails to simply be made out of Icarus. The last thing that I'm going to do from our perspective to make it a one design, although I am printing the boats out of PETG, which is somewhat UV resistant. Here in Florida, we actually have, we race 36 weeks in our regular series. So 36 of the 52 weeks we're in the water and we're in Florida. Florida, we get a lot of sunshine and a lot of heat. So the last thing I'm really adding is I'm going to require that all of our vessels be painted. It's going to allow you to customize it, make the boats easier to see, but it's also, for us, it's going to add another layer of UV protection over this filament, hoping that maybe these boats can sail for years and years without any issues. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at all these bits and pieces and kind of how they fit together and why I was so impressed with the design of this Footy. All right, so what we see on the table is the majority of the pieces, and I've printed them. The only difference I did is I decided to use, I'm using the Bamboo Studio. Everything was printed on my Bamboo Labs A1. For like the rudder and the keel and some of the internal structural parts, to include even like the servo arm, I went with the strong setting, which essentially gave it 6 walls. I wanted to ensure that none of these structural pieces would break. Everything else I printed as the file came down as he recommended. So pretty straightforward. As I go through some of the pieces here, you're going to see that by the time we're done with this video, there's not really that many pieces. The main hull itself is really just 2 primary pieces. Part that really impressed me is how well these slip together. So I did no post prep, I haven't done any sanding, I haven't done anything. So you can see how the back half and the front half of the hull slide over each other and lock together perfectly right off the printer. Before I glue these halves together though, I want to talk about some of the pieces on the inside and then realize which pieces you should try to put together before you would glue them together. Because I have very large hands, and this is a pretty small opening, as we can see. So once some of that stuff is in there, you may have to use tweezers or be creative or find somebody with smaller fingers, I guess. The design though, I'm going to be honest, when I looked at his design and looked at the keel box, it really feels like, I'm going to say it again, but a 65 and 95. The rudder shaft goes all the way through the boat, so there is no chance for any water intrusion. The keel box itself it's a structural member that runs all the way from the top and bottom of the hull. Extremely strong, completely sealed. Again, no chance for any kind of water intrusion into the hull. On the front half here, well, I'm going to go over the parts. So we've seen the front half and the back half of the hull, a two-piece hull. Your keel is built, again, very similar to a 65 or 95, that it is a fully removable keel. There's actually two holes that run through this. So there is a two sets of 2mm carbon rod that run the entire length of the keel to give it some rigidity. There's going to be an M3 screw, just like the 65s and 95s, that will screw in and hold that keel. Very similar to the 65 and 95s. As we move over to the ballast, we're going to have three pieces to this ballast. We've got the entire back portion of the ballast, we've got the nose cone, and then we've got this funky little disc. So the idea is that this ballast will be filled with lead shot. I believe it's the number 7.5, a very small lead shot. But to assemble this, you're going to fill your nose cone completely with lead shot. You're going to take this disc, which is going to compress down inside there, and it's going to hold the lead shot from falling out. Because after you then pour in your lead shot and fill the back half of the ballast, this lead shot's being held in by that disc. Then you can proceed to go ahead and glue on the nose cone, completing your entire ballast. So yeah, it's really that simple. From that point, you're going to see on the bottom of the keel, very similar to, again, a 65, a 95 or something like that. It slips right into the groove. These holes are designed to accept a 3mm carbon rod. So once you're done, you can jam through 3mm carbon rod pieces. It locks it in, and then from that point, the advantage is if you ever needed to or something crazy happened, you can replace the ballast, which is pretty shocking for such a small boat. Again, giving credit to how well it was engineered. And at the end, we'll look at my prototype, which is finished. But again, so 3mm carbon rods will pin your ballast onto your keel. An M3 screw up on top. Well, here in a second, we'll go ahead and we'll do that. We'll show you how that assembles. So here you'll have a keel and ballast assembly. Your rudder is a very unique design too. I believe it's one of the only footies that have this. So the footy has, as it prints, it'll print these two pieces, which is your main rudder and the foil, but the bottoms are flat. So to create a fully symmetrical airfoil, you're going to glue on the bottom portion. I'm not sure if the camera can see that though, but then what it does is it'll provide a fully symmetrical airfoil. So while it's flying underwater, to provide stability, potentially unseen in the footy design like ever before. Once that is glued together, the two pieces, your rudder is done. It will print with a shaft designed for a 2mm solid carbon rod. And when we get back, you're going to see that that rod simply slides through the entire rear portion of the hull. There will be a printable horn. And that is going to be your entire rudder assembly. So the two pieces, just finishing that foil underneath the water, and then a horn up on top. If you do zoom in, you'll see that I did use M2 bolts and nuts to be able to go ahead and, like I said, tighten that horn on this 2mm carbon fiber shaft. So that is the entire rudder assembly. All right, moving on, I'm gonna take that apart real quick and set that to the side. So we've looked at some of the core pieces of the hull, your keel, your ballast, and your rudder. the hatch. So I know you can't tell from the picture, but another part that impressed me with this design, the only portion of this hull that I can flex and squeeze is going to be way up here in the very front. Other than that, it is shockingly durable. I would even go as far as to say it feels like it's a 65 or a 95. Very, very impressive. Also, considering if you're a 3D printer type person, these walls, this is a single layer thickness. So PETG versus some other products, PETG is a little bit more flexible, but with that flexibility, well, when things flex, they don't break, right? Where PLA is a little more rigid, PLA probably would have eliminated some of this flex, but the problem is if you drop your boat or something else happens, it may crack versus flexing. So at the stern here for the hatch, here we see we have a rough opening, and here we have a trim ring, which is going to clean up that opening and make it extremely precise. This trim ring goes on the inside. Now, the designer also offers and provides a jig for you. If you're going to use a slow curing glue, or maybe you're just not as comfortable, this is just a jig only to be used while gluing. The lower portion of the jig can drop in. You can use these back two holes for alignment. You can even see the upper portion has a groove which matches up. So if needed, it even includes a jig. And then you can use these 5 holes to tighten up and hold your trim ring in place until the glue cures. I actually didn't use these. When I looked at how well it fit, I simply glued it, held it in place, and then it was done. So I had no issues doing it. I believe maybe if you had glued your hull together, and well, I don't know if you'd even get it in there afterwards, maybe you would, like I said, but it is an option to give you a boost of confidence or an extra set of fingers if you need some assistance there. Once the trim ring is in place, I'm going to talk about the hatch. I chose to print the hatch out of TPU. That way it would be flexible, right? Extremely durable, and then, in my opinion, hopefully conform if there were any variances. After I printed the first one, it fit in there, but in my opinion, it popped out a little bit too easy. So the only, well, I'm not going to say the only change, but the first change I made to his files is I opted to go ahead and I printed this at 102%. What this does is it made it to where once I go to pop in that last edge, well, and I'm just going to use the trim ring so we can kind of see. As I go to pop this hatch on, it takes a little bit of force and flex to get that last joint to kind of pop in there. Once it does though, it locks in dead solid. And so far in all of my sailing on the water, I have not taken on a single drip of water inside the hull. So going slightly oversized, put some really good pressure on this hatch. Like I said, you do have to flex it, and sometimes even if you simply press down in the center, because that TPU will flex really well, like I said, I get a flawless and perfect seal every time with that hatch. So, in TPU, I've yet to, if you've never printed with TPU, I honestly, truly believe I would need a scissors or a knife. I don't believe it's actually possible to tear or break this stuff, so very impressive. So that will cover the stern and the hatch. All right, moving forward, we're gonna jump forward and talk a little bit about the rudder servo. Now, if I was to fully install this trim ring would be in there, and it'd actually give a little more support for these 2 screws to go in, but for demonstrations here today, it really shouldn't matter. I've chosen to use all metal gear servos. They're waterproof. They're going to be a little bit heavier, but I hope long term it's going to give me a lot less trouble. Here we can see I actually have the servo already installed on the support arms, which are 3D printed. In order to bring this servo underneath up to the deck, I actually had to put a few washers to shimmy that servo up a little higher because I wanted to get this bottom surface as close to the deck as possible. What the kit provides to you, and I also printed out of TPU, this is just a rubber washer. And what I've done is, I believe potentially that rubber washer could have gone on the top, you know, with your control arm, but I believe it's more effective by going ahead and I place that rubber washer on the top of the servo. Once we go inside, and this can be done, you know, through the hatch or later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apologize, my fingers in there, but I'm just going to try to slide this assembly in place. And then here in a second, you're going to see where the two M2 bolts hold it. I'm trying to do this with giant fingers and to where you guys can hopefully can see. So here we can go. I've got the head of the servo has now popped through, and utilizing these holes with the M2 screws, all that has to be done is we're going to drive down bolt number 1. We're going to run bolt number 2. And just like that, with 2 bolts, the rudder servo is completely installed. You can see with the slightly oversized opening, that rubber washer now has been crushed between the servo and the hull, creating a watertight seal. So what does it look like from another perspective here? So now if we want, we can pull this out of the way. The camera can kind of zoom down in there. You can see how it is nestled right there out of the way, which is really nice. With that offset bracket now, you can see that rudder and none of that assembly interferes as you're trying to reach inside the boat and do anything. So that was the complete install. And then on the reverse side, if that fails or something else happens, you're simply just going to remove the 2 screws. And just like that, you will drop that servo out, bring it up the hatch, replace it, and put in a new one. Alright, so that covers the rudder servo. Now, there has to be, there's a support structure for, this is going to be our sail winch, and here you can see I have it partially assembled. I have it mounted to this servo bracket, which actually will be permanently glued into the hull, and I have the servo arm, which is currently on there, which is also 3D printed. But I'm going to go ahead and pop off the servo arm so we can see a little bit better. Now what the designer has done for us, and I'm going to show you with this front hull, one of the pieces that you'll print is simply an alignment jig for your sail winch. And inside this hull, you can see I've got that piece is already glued in there. So I'm actually just using this whole assembly as a jig for myself. And what happens then is this notch, this corner, is going to line up, and that's going to be the corner of where this assembly glues into the back hull. Now when I glued this in, I won't have the servo on it. So let me go ahead and I'll pull that servo off. So now just so you know, I just simply use the screws that will come with your servo to install this one here. So these are just the servo screws that are screwed into this holding assembly. We talked about what modifications I've had to make to the designer so far. And I increased the size of the hatch to 102%. We talked about that. That's a change I made. The other thing I realized is When I went to put this servo in, he had two large chunks on both sides of the servo. So when I went to place my servo in, it was pinching my power and my control lines. So the only other change is after I printed this, I used my little Dremel tool and I cut out a small chunk of this. That way it wouldn't put any pressure or pinch, the lines for my servo connections. So that's modification number 2 to his designer kit. So where this assembly needs to go. This assembly needs to go somewhere in the back half of this boat. And that is where this alignment piece, this jig that he provided, comes into play. Since I have glued this in and it won't move, I slid the two halves together, not gluing them. I then proceeded to put glue on the 3 surfaces that will make contact with the hull. So it'll be the 1, 2, and 3. I put my slow set glue in there, pinching it with my fingers. I'm then able to come in here, and I'll show you, try to get Bart to zoom in, but I'm then able to use that alignment jig, which has that notch, to lock that into place. Once my glue's set for just a few seconds, I was then able to go ahead and pull it apart, make sure I had a fully glued and cured surface. At this point, ensuring that I knew that there'd be probably the most amount of force exerted inside the entire boat was going to be the sail winch. Since I still had access to this half, even though I had glued those surfaces, I went ahead and added a little extra CA glue. So I glued around some of the extra seams. I like to use a UV curing CA glue. It allows me to build up whatever joints I want to and then cure it in place. So once this is glued in though, I'm no longer using my jig hull because really that's just extra weight and an extra piece I didn't need. So once this is glued in, I'm one step closer eventually to gluing these two halves together, but no longer needing that piece. Once if that was glued in, as you saw, I can now simply drop in that servo, screw it back into place, and that is ready to go. Alright, we are running out of pieces extremely fast, which is exciting. I will talk about the front of the hull real quick. The bumper that he does provide, I did print in TPU. That way you would, just like your 95, 65 and everything else, you would have a nice rubber nose to bump into other boats if that were to ever happen. The nice thing about this is it is a flawless fit. Again, being all designed and drawn on CAD, simply glue it in place. The nose was reinforced during the printing process. There's a few extra layers up there. So that front of the hull is extremely strong. Like I said, but that bumper then finishes that off, making it safe for other boats when you're trading paint on the water. One of the parts, probably one of the pieces that impressed me the most, and probably one of the top reasons why I agreed to print this boat. Inevitably, someday, somewhere, you're going to need to change out your control lines. And to run lines even through some of our other boats can be a real big pain. Well, once I've got servos in there and servo arms, I couldn't imagine how you would go through to run all new lines on the inside of this hull once it's all glued together. What the designer has done is he's created a carriage. What happens is the line is going to enter, come down through this very small hole on the deck right next to your, where your mast goes. And then what it does is it goes way up into the front of the boat and it goes around one pulley. It shoots all the way to the back of the boat where there's a second pulley, and then there has to be a block where that line is tied off at. So what the designer has done is he has created this carriage. And here what happens is this carriage is going to go deep inside the boat. So the line goes through this pulley, comes way back to this pulley that moves, and then the line is going to come up here and it's going to go through this block where it's going to anchor and be fixed. What impressed me is he designed a groove to make this removable. So all you simply do is, as you can see, it slides in there. I'm not sure if Bart can zoom down in there, and you can see that, you know, this assembly is probably, you know, maybe 4 to 5 inches long, but the entire thing slides into this groove. The impressive part is it's able to slide in and out even once the entire boat is assembled. You're going to simply line it up in there, and you can see with little or no effort, I have slid in that entire assembly. So to lock that in though too, and I actually made mine out of some 2mm stainless steel, and I just bent this into configuration at the very top through the bulkhead. This simply slides through, locking this carriage in place, and then as it swivels down, locks in place. So this is firmly, there is not a rattle or a budge. And again, if you need to run new lines, you break a line or something happens from the inside, you're going to simply release the pin, pull it, and this entire carriage assembly for all your control line comes out of the boat. So very impressive, very cool. And again, a side note, I have done no post-processing on the, this is how it printed and how it slides in. I didn't have to sand anything, adjust anything. It just fits that good. So, continuing to run out of pieces, some of the last pieces we're going to have and get a chance to talk about. So this next assembly serves multiple purposes. Once we build our rig, and there's going to be 2 sets of ball bearings. There's a ball bearing that goes down to the very bottom of the hull, and then there's going to be a ball bearing that sits right in here, and if the camera can see, there's a ridge. So we have a larger ball bearing I can grab and show you where that sits. Well, actually, let me do that right now. So here we have the larger of the 2 ball bearings. So this is going to be your upper ball bearing, and once the shaft goes through, we can see how it sits right there. So there's a much smaller ball bearing, it's very, very small, that goes down into the hull on the bottom. So you got an upper and lower ball bearing, and your rig is just going to slide in. The purposes of this piece, if we look, we're going to see that when this locks in place, it completely locks down that ball bearing. So that ball bearing can no longer fall out. So the first purpose it does, it's going to lock in all your ball bearings for your rig. The second purpose it does, it's going to essentially provide an oversized washer for when you go to assemble your keel. Let me lock it in place though so you can see. The other very impressive things the designer has done, and Bart, if you can look, he's actually added reinforcements, and it's got the cutouts to where your M3 nuts fit right into the hull. So those nuts are going to stay there. Oftentimes I may add a dab of CA glue just to lock it and stay, but those are built into the hull. They lock right in. So when we come over, these 2 screws are going to lock those into play. Alright, so here what I've done is I'm going to show you how this assembly mounts onto the top of your boat. At this point, you know, the boat potentially could be glued together. So with the 2 nuts we had just talked about, they're simply 2 screws. And these will screw down. And what that does is that locks this entire assembly onto the top deck of your boat, which secures in the bearings for your mast. On top of this post, I'll show you on my finished one, I simply put a screw-in eye hook. And that's going to be, well, I can grab it here, or Bart maybe pan over real quick. So you can see on my finished prototype, I've simply got an eye hook, which I screwed into the top of that. And that is where my control line comes up through as the sheet goes back and forth. So coming back to the piece, again, you can see it does have a small pre-drilled hole. So depending on what size, eye hook you would use, you would put that in there. So this serves, purpose 1 is for the ball bearing. Purpose 2 is for to guide your control line. Like I said, and I had mentioned how it acts as an oversized washer. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how the keel installs. I've chosen to use, and I think it's a 30 millimeter bolt. You can see it goes very deep into the keel. That gives it an enormous amount of strength. But this, again, this is a raw kit fresh off the printer. I haven't touched it with a sander. I've done nothing to it. And it is a flawless fit. Dropping this long bolt through the top using my fancy, just happen to be using my fancy screwdriver. There's a lot of threads there, and since that bolt is only threading into the PLA plastic, I have no concerns about its strength. There we go. So just like that, we would be getting even one step closer. So 2 that hold to the deck, add your eye bolt, it holds in the bearings. And if we had glued on all the other pieces we had talked about, well, officially, there is no other pieces even left for the main boat. The only pieces now left is a stand and what is needed for the rig. All right, so we're going to take a look at a few more of the pieces that he included with this kit. The first one, we're just going to go over real quick. There's not a lot to it, but he gives you the pieces to make a stand. And here you can see I've got a stand assembled already, but these are the 2 pieces that come with it. They've got the holes and everything ready to go. His pieces were designed, I believe, for a 9 millimeter rod. In the United States, I didn't have that, so I ended up having to take a drill bit and just opening these a tiny amount. That way I could use these bamboo wood sticks that I got off Amazon. I decided to put a little bit of foam in there to kind of cushion things. But that's really as easy as it comes. If you want, he does offer, and you can print these little footy end caps. And the little footy end caps even have a little hole in them. That way if you wanted to run a stake through on a windy day, you could. But real simple, the bolt of the boat drops right on and you're good to go. A way to keep it from laying on the ground. And again, obviously you could adapt and do anything you want with the legs, but real simple, a great little boat stand. Supports the hull very, very, very well. We're going to go ahead and we're going to keep moving on, and we're going to talk a little bit about the rig. When you pull his files from Thingiverse, there were some challenges to creating the rig. In the comment section he has on Thingiverse, he talks about the recommended length for some of these spars and pieces. I waited until I created the sail plan before I cut any of those pieces. And how I created the sail plan is I went to inside of his comments. You'll see there's a link to an on shape, which is actually where all of his CAD drawings are. Across the bottom there's a series of tabs, and you can bring up the sail pattern. You can look and rotate 3-dimensional views of every aspect of the boat. So I kind of went old school, and the only way that I know, I stole the image from that on shape. I took it to another piece of software where I blew it up to life size. And you can kind of see by my tape joints is I had to print it out, and it took 4 pieces of printer paper where I then lined up the seams and I taped it together. And this is how I came up with my sail pattern. Having this full-size drawing in my computer, I took advantage to look at the shapes of the battens and all my corner reinforcement. So I simply stole those shapes and images right off the computer and I imported them into my vinyl cutter. So now with my Cricut, I can actually cut my insignia cloth and make all of my pieces for my corner reinforcements and my battens. So that is how I created the sail pattern. Once I had a pattern that I was comfortable with that worked with all my other boats, I transferred that pattern onto a poster board so it's no longer taped together, and I can lay it over my material, and for our club's sake we're using Icarus, and I can simply trace it with my X-Acto knife and cut out my sail pattern. If we do look, this is probably one of the simplest sails that are out there. What's nice is we can see here that all we've done is we've created a pocket that slips over the main, your main spar here. So there's no rings, there's no tying loops. It is simply a pocket that slips down over this 3mm shaft, and you're done. And to keep it simple, I use a 1/4 inch tape. So if we go back to the sail pattern, and hopefully you can kind of see it here, you can see that included on my pattern is where my 1/4 inch tape goes. So once I cut this pattern, I'm going to run my 1/4 inch double-sided tape. I'm not going to bend my pattern, but how that works then is once you have your tape, I'm going to see if hopefully you can see it here. Once the tape is here, I simply expose the tape. I'm going to fold over the leading edge to this perfect line, and right there we've created that pocket for the 3mm carbon fiber rod to slide through. And that is essentially, that is it. This is a single flat piece of material with one glue seam that creates a pocket, and then you put your corner reinforcements and your battens, and it is done. So very, very, very simple. Possibly one of the easiest to make. That is how I created, and so here we look. This is the full image that I would have stolen off the On-Shape CAD designs. So as we can see here, it included all of the rig assembly type stuff for reference and for proportions. To create the sail pattern, I cut off that stuff, but this allowed me also to have a guideline and a start on how to create the rig. Pieces to the rig, the critical pieces to the rig, are also all 3D printable. I have some in white. They're probably easier to see on camera, so I'll pull those out. For the final one, I actually printed them in black, and it looks nicer. But here we can see, here is that piece, right, for our rig. Here is going to be the vertical riser, and this is going to be how we adjust the depth of our sails. So all of these are 3D printed. And if you follow and look at his drawings and plans, you will see that there's a 5mm carbon rod that will go down into the hull. Okay, 5mm carbon rod goes into the hull. The 5mm carbon rod connects the leading edge of the sail, and we'll call it the boom in the back here is 3mm solid carbon. So I don't have the pieces cut to size at the moment, but you'll see that they very easily and quickly slide together. Adjusting your sails, making your adjustments, again, I'm going to say that it felt a lot like this was a DF 65 or 95. What he had created, you also print out of TPU some tiny little washers. If the camera wants to zoom in, on the back side of this, we can see one side is fully closed, And on this other side there's a tiny little cutout and a groove. And this little bitty rubber washer simply stuffs down and fits right in there. That way, when your rod comes through, it's going to hit that washer and you've got to get it to pop through, which takes a little bit the first time. It's a very, very snug washer. Once it does now, when you need to make adjustments on your sail, you can see that this is very strong, very rigid. However, when you want to make adjustments, just like you do on the boom of your 95 and 65, which has 2 rubber washers, you can now simply slide this forward or backwards to make your adjustments with that rubber washer hidden on the inside. This will be used at the rear of the boom, and as we can see here, and it's going to be in black though, so there you can see if I want more sail depth, I simply slide that in. If I want to flatten my sail, I'm going to slide it out. The same system is used up at the top of the mast. Give part a second to see there. So I believe I think that acts as your halyard. I could be wrong. I'm not the best with whatever, but so to tighten, this leading edge of your sail, it's the same system. You're able to slide that up or shrink that down. So the adjustments are very fast and very easy on these sails too. So there's a finished one. Okay, so we know that as we come back down here, and I've just shown you how a 5mm rod is going to go down into the boat. A 5mm rod is going to bring us forward. And then the 3mm rod is going to end up being the primary portion of the mast, like I said, and your boom. Something that he doesn't necessarily say in his comments, and I know you're not going to be able to see it on the camera, but to keep the rake from twisting or your glue breaking, on the very inside, he's included, I'm going to call it a vertical or a horizontal tab. And if I can get Bart to zoom in really, really close on this, I can show you where I've already cut the tab. So deep inside this assembly, there's a groove that's going to match up and fit in here. So as I go to insert it, it'll drop in, and now this can no longer spin on its own. That is used with all the 5mm rod. Now how I create this, I use like a Dremel style tool. I'm a big fan. This is a diamond cut off wheel. I like the diamond cut off wheels because a lot of times the, I don't know if I call them composite or whatever they are, they have a tendency, if you twist or do it wrong, they can blow up and come apart. So I've been using this diamond cut off wheel forever. But what I've done, as you can see here, is I've actually used that wheel to cut the entire depth. I simply come in here. Once I have it fully, I give it a little bit of a wiggle back and forth to widen out that groove. And just like that, I've got a perfect and flawless groove that will lock into the internal required pieces. So that's how I make those. So the 5mm lock. Everything else, you should be able to look at the drawings. Again, there's so few pieces here. One question that is going to come up, when this rig goes down into your boat, when that stud drops down into the boat, in our previous video I had talked about how there's 2 ball bearings. And I had shown you the large ball bearing which sits on the top, and I had told you there's a very small bearing that goes all the way down inside of the hull. I'm going to show you both of those ball bearings right now. I'm going to put them on paper maybe right here. That is the small one. In the previous video you saw the large ball bearing which was up in the top, and this little tiny ball bearing is the one that's going to go all the way down inside your boat. The designer utilizes this 5mm, and it's got a 3mm opening on the inside. His recommendation was to take a 2mm rod, which has some play, because I put in a 2mm rod in a 3mm opening, and to glue it in there as best you could, because this ball bearing on the bottom is designed, well, here we go, so as we can see here, when that glues on, this ball bearing and your 5mm carbon shaft is what slips down into the bottom of your boat. Now this is far too long, but what happens is this has a 5mm opening. So your shaft is about, I think, 90mm tall. Again, it's on his comments. But this ball bearing would go on the top. So this is how you'd end up with the top ball bearing and the bottom ball bearing that slides down in. Now I was trying to be a little bit creative, and I didn't like the amount of play that was here. And since we were using 3mm carbon rod for other parts of the rig, I chose to just simply go ahead, because this is a very snug, perfect fit. I glued a 3mm rod into this. And then I cut it off because it only needs to be the length of this ball bearing. And you're going to have to follow me on this one. This was a little creative. So since I would have cut this off, leaving a tiny little bitty stub. And then what I did is I put this entire shaft into my drill. And I started spinning it. And I took a small metal file and I simply filed down this 3mm shaft until it was 2mm, and this ball bearing slipped over it. The advantage that gave me is I had zero play, and I was ensured that my two pieces of the shaft were completely lined up, versus trying to take the 2mm and trying to get that in the center, even though there was a bunch of play. So this allowed me to make sure it was perfectly lined up, but again, I just simply put it in my drill and I spun it with a small metal file until I ground it down to the 2mm, where this ball bearing then fit over that little tiny nub. So that's how I overcame that. A little bit of creativity and effort, but I think it gave me a much more precise shaft to go down into the for my rig. And that's really going to kind of wrap up the entire rig. There's only a couple pieces of carbon fiber. We talked about how the pattern for the sailcloth. And even though it's a lot of information, and some of the images may or may not be good, I can't encourage enough that you go back to Thingiverse. Some of his drawings are spectacular, but go into his comments. You will see the hyperlink to go to the on shape, where you can zoom in, you can look, there's cutaways of every single piece on how they fit together. The last bit, kind of question that comes into play, and the question that I had when we talked about introducing to the club. How much does it cost? So as we talked earlier, I am in Florida, in the great US of A. I would say that these are pre-tariff costs. Who knows what's going to see an increase or not. But these were just recently, all my stuff was purchased this month, so these are some really good prices. But when I ran through it and I tried to factor in everything, from the cost of the filament, the Metal Gear servos, I included a Fly Sky receiver. I also included into my costs, for our club, we are going to use this Spectrum. It's a Lifey battery, and the big advantage there is it's a 2S, but it's a 6.6 volts. Most of your servos and your radio gear is designed to operate in the 4.8 to 6 volt range, which is why most people will use the 6.6 volt Lifey batteries for their Dragon Force and Dragonflight, the DF65 and 95. The advantage is at the 6.6 volts, you're not at a risk of burning up your servos like you would be with a LiPo at 7.4 volts. The Lifey batteries are extremely lightweight, but the big advantage over the 4.8 or running up to the 6 volts is the 6 volts are going to give your servos more power, more torque, which is probably super critical for the, not for the rudder. You know, we put tiny rudder servos in everything, but the additional torque when it comes to operating that sail winch with that sail arm is what we do. So I've included the cost of the Spectrum 6.6 volt 300 milliamp battery. So carbon rod, linkages, the battery. The other thing I did, because you're not going to be able to see, but from a visual perspective, I tuck my receiver, sits high inside the hull, just next to and above the servo winch. So in order to make that fit, and most of our people are operating fly sky, there is two different types of receivers. We will normally use the IA6B, which comes in a hard case, but it's significantly larger and it's actually twice as heavy. Where this is the FSIA6, which you know, or if you've ever seen, it comes in a soft little plastic case. All your connections are actually vertical, where on the other receiver they're horizontal. But this receiver is able to tuck inside the hull out of the way up near the top in the event that you did get any water intrusion. So this is the servos that our club, or I'm sorry, the receiver that our club will be using, both for weight and because most of our people do have a fly sky. I include the cost for the wood dowels to make the stand, the glue, the miscellaneous M2 and M3 screws. I include the cost of a can of spray paint to paint the hull. I even included some small costs if you wanted to use some body filler over any of the seams to smooth things out before you painted it. I included the cost of the Icarus, the signal cloth, insignia cloth, and the cost of the actual control line. I tried to factor in every possible thing I would put into this so I would know where I was at. I included our sales tax for the state of Florida, and my cost of actual full materials to build one boat and make it sail ready, and again that includes receiver and battery, is right at about $130. I think, considering the caliber of the boat, the strength of the boat, that's a pretty good deal. For my last segment, what are my impressions? I've had it on the water. I've had other people who have owned Footies, and they've said, you know, they sail surprisingly well. Because I'll be honest, the most frustrating boat for me is the DF65. It's the smallest, so it can't go the quickest. It's really light, so sometimes it likes to go into irons. If the wind dramatically changes and it's overpowered, sometimes it refuses to tack. Other times downwind, it may submarine, the boat may disappear, and it may shoot back out of the water, or it may turn 90 degrees and roll out and try to take out half a dozen other boats. So me personally, I do race all four of our other classes. The 65 was my least favorite. So the thought of going to an even smaller boat, and my initial thought through my brain was, wow, that's probably going to be even worse than a 65. I was shocked. I can't explain enough that I actually believe that it potentially responds, reacts, and sails better than a DF65. The last time I had it in the water, the US 1 meters were out there. The wind got so strong that we really should have had B rigs. Everyone had A rigs. They were having a difficult time tacking. We had boats that were submarining. I actually went out, and when I tossed the Footy in the water, everyone at the club thought I was insane. They're like, dude, there's no way, it's way too windy. Believe it or not, and it's a compliment to the designer, the boat sailed phenomenal. It tacked when I asked it to tack. It didn't even hesitate. It tracked near perfectly heading upwind. And as I rolled around and caught a big gust, that nose popped down for a second, but I believe all of this buoyancy that is built into this front deck, that nose would pop down and it would roll right back up. And I also believe it's a testament to the foil on this rudder. As we have a fully symmetrical, full flying foil down there, you know, and it's coming forward and water is running over that foil, when it catches a gust and that nose tried to go down, the buoyancy was like, hey, we're coming back up, And at the same time, the foil on that rudder was pulling the rear of that boat down. So when our US 1 meters were submarining, this boat would dip down, pop up, and continue to track. So again, I can't emphasize enough. Everyone was shocked. On that day, I immediately had 4 other club members come up because they must have thought I was doing some voodoo magic, and they wanted the control. And when we sailed this footy with this rig in a situation where the US 1 meters needed to drop down to a B rig, it really proved its capabilities. I've asked myself, and I'll go back to the reason of why we chose to do a one design with this boat for our club. This boat is absolutely probably heavier than any other handmade footy that's out there. You know, their goal is to get it under a pound. In doing so, though, they pick up a lot of bad characteristics from the people that I've spoken to. They have a tendency to submarine and all these other things. So possibly the additional weight, which I believe, based on sailing some other boats, may also add to its phenomenal sailing characteristics. On a light wind day, I believe some of the other footies out there that are lighter, maybe made out of balsa and different designs, maybe with a different type of ballast, I believe on a light wind day, other footies would probably beat this boat. When the wind comes up into play, and especially if it happens to be a fairly windy day, I'd be tempted to go toe and toe and say this potentially may be the best, higher wind hull and rig design out there. It's just, like I said, it's impressive. But from our, like I said, so again, for our club, doing a one design, we've kind of leveled that field. That way, if no wind shows up or a bunch of wind shows up, we're all going to be in the same class boat competing against each other. But again, I'll say flat out, a shout out to the designer, his hull design, especially the front portion, like I said, the buoyancy that has been built into the front of this boat, absolutely 100% did exactly what it's supposed to when that nose got forced down running downwind. Like I said, the foil is really unique. I believe the foil, not only does it help level the boat, but I believe it's providing a significant amount of stability and control, even as that boat simply is trying to sail whichever direction, whether it be upwind or downwind. So kudos once again to Nev G. That's a capital N, lowercase EV, capital G on Thingiverse, for putting this design out there. It looks like he released it April 10th of 2024. He is still responding. I noticed there's some people in there making comments about building them. So if you have any questions for the designer, or by the time I'm done, if I have questions or suggestions, or if I think I can improve things, I'm not sure that I can. Again, he is responding out there on Thingiverse. And I think for right now, that's going to wrap things up. Our next video, we're going to give you guys a chance to see, hopefully not one, but multiple of them on the water racing, so you can see what they look like and how they respond. But if you are interested in building one of these boats, I highly, highly encourage it. I think it's a great boat. Again, consider all the equations, like I said, and I'll get you, for the next video, I'll get you a final full up weight of how much ours ended up weighing to. But thanks for watching if you made it all the way through this. And again, if you have any questions, give some comments below. Big shout out to Sail Wars for filming this. I know Bart with Sail Wars he is right now printing some as we speak to jump in and join what could be a very exciting new class for us, at least, to race. Thank you and have a great day.
Please subscribe and hit like for more videos. Sail Wars thanks you for liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends and family. Attention all club webmasters, Sail Wars needs your support. Please make it easy for your club members by putting a link to our homepage on your club's website. Thank you from the Sail Wars team. And we have a YouTube homepage. When you go there, you'll find playlist. You can click on this link and it shows you all the videos, over 300. And of course, you can subscribe from that YouTube homepage. And check out the best of Sail Wars. Sail Wars is supported by you and our volunteers. Thank you. We are all about increasing participation in our sport. Also, please join a great club like the Northern Maryland Model Yacht Club. And of course, do more than what is expected in that club. We love the AMYA. Did you know that Sail Wars is the most watched and respected RC selling information site? A big thank you to our supporters. And did you know we've made over 300 videos and have racers all around the world? Join us as we spread the word about RC selling. By subscribing, it's free.
There's a dot?